are talking Spider-Man No Way Home, directed by John Watts, who directed the previous two Spider-Man movies. Now, I have to say right up the front, this is going to be a spoiler-free review in as much as I'm only going to be talking about things that you have seen in the trailer. So if you've seen the trailers, I'm not going to be saying anything outside of that, but if you haven't seen the trailers and want to go in completely fresh, I will be talking about at least the stuff that has been in the trailer at the very least. So the story is the third one, and it follows directly from the previous movie where Spider-Man's identity is outed and he is initially kind of charged with murder of Quentin Beck. And, you know, it focuses on, initially at least, Spider-Man's attempt to clear his name and his friends and family who have kind of got all swept up with it. He turns to kind of Doctor Strange, and this causes a crack in the multiverse where we get villains from previous Spider-Man movies spilling out into ours. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So that is it. Whether I'm going with the old plot synopsis, but I'm sure most of you will probably know where this is going to kind of go. But what do we think? That's what we're going to be talking about. I have to say right off the bat, this was my favourite out of the three Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. What I liked about this one the most is its fairly unique plot, because it doesn't kind of follow a typical plot progression in regards to things that we've seen before. I think this one does offer some genuinely kind of new elements. Now, obviously, the multiverse is part of that. But one of the things, and this has been revealed in the trailers, one of the things that I really did enjoy is the Peter Parker, Tom Holland's character, sort of trying to ultimately save the villains from the previous universe. So these are people who are somewhat antagonistic towards him in various different kind of degrees. We'll talk about it again in a minute. And, you know, but he wants to save them, and this ultimately puts him at odds with Doctor Strange. So, you know, heroes and allies now become antagonists to people who are kind of like antagonists to other Spider-Men, for example. And now, you know, Peter Parker's mission is to try and help, but like a kind of a hostile witness, really. They are somewhat hostile towards him, but he is trying to save him. And I thought this gave this movie a kind of a plot threads that are quite unique to it, and it doesn't feel like a rehash of the same old kind of story. There are elements here that, you know, CGI battles and stuff, which are typical, you know, superhero fare. But I have to say, the plot here was really interesting. The motivations of Spider-Man, and he goes through a big sort of character arc in this movie, I thought were really interesting, and I think, you know, the best and the most interesting and the most mature overall of the kind of the Spider-Man films. There are elements in the first movie where I thought were quite mature, but this one I think overall is the kind of the most mature in regards to its kind of themes and, you know, actions causing reactions and things like that, which I really enjoyed. As I've kind of alluded to, my favourite scenes were actually not the action scenes at all, but the dialogue scenes between Spider-Man and a variety of antagonists from other Spider-Man universes. I actually thought they were really interesting because each of these antagonists has a somewhat of a different kind of personality. They don't all seem the same. They all have different kind of motivations. And I thought it was the way that they were depicted, and some are more antagonistic than others, was really interesting. And I have to say, those scenes were my absolute favourite. I would say that kind of only the Lizard is the one that is kind of, I feel, is treated a little bit like just a kind of not much development there, albeit a little bit more development maybe than he had in his own film. But I thought those were great. It really kind of fleshed out, I think, the dynamics between this kind of the villains and how they kind of interact with each other, for example, giving them and improving, I think, their kind of characters from the kind of the previous films. The standouts being, obviously, I think, Dr. Octopus and the Green Goblin, obviously from the original Raimi movies. But I think, again, it really complements the original kind of movies. You know, but I think Electro goes a long way as well. Jamie Foxx's Electro of, I think, making his character more palatable as well, and kind of, again, giving him that kind of unique kind of emotion. I thought everyone's was on point here. I love the interactions between all of the kind of the characters. There are some emotional moments in this movie. I thought it ended in a really good manner. Again, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but how it leaves off is it's kind of, if you're familiar with the comics, it's somewhat like one of the comics, but it actually leaves a status quo in quite an interesting and interesting and somewhat familiar setting, which I thought was kind of quite makes it interesting going forward. To be honest, I have seen some criticisms even before this came out that the VFX wasn't ready, and the artists were working right up until the kind of the last moment to get it fixed. And that may be the case, but I have to say I didn't really have any problem with the kind of the VFX here. I thought it all looked very, very good, to be honest with you. And yeah, I was kind of swept away the kind of the story here. What doesn't work for me? I maybe feel this movie's a little bit overstuffed. It's a long film, but they try to cram a lot in. The one thing I feel really got the shaft, and again, this was kind of covered in the trailers, is the kind of the legal ramifications that was left off in the last film, where Mysterio ultimately frames Spider-Man for his murder. And I feel that is dealt with too neatly, too quickly, and just to kind of almost get it out of the way. And it somewhat deflates, I think, the end of the second kind of Spider-Man film, to be honest with you. Yes, I think the movie does end in a big sort of CGI battle, at least towards the end there. And it will remind you a lot of, I think, Spider-Man 3 in some ways, the Raimi Spider-Man 3. It kind of has similar aesthetics. Again, I think the Lizard maybe gets a little bit of a short shaft here as well, because I don't feel he's more just a kind of a rampaging monster to a point. And they've kind of changed him a little bit. I won't kind of say too much why, but it's I think more could have been done with the Lizard. But again, this is just kind of like a case of being a little bit kind of overstuffed. There is a sequence that has a fan favourite character at the beginning of the movie. Felt a little bit shoehorned in for me. And I have to say, I thought the end credits were a little weak. There is one proper end credits and a kind of a trailer for a new film that's going to come up at the very, very end. But I think the actual end credits was a little weak. And this kind of movie, I having seen trailers for Morbius, I think it kind of, continuity-wise, this movie is pretty good in kind of, having good continuity with this current MCU series, but also in continuity with some of the kind of the previous movies. But I have to say, having seen the trailer of Morbius, that looks like it might mess the continuity up a little bit again. So we'll see what happens when that movie actually comes out. Because I thought they did a good job of keeping it pretty straight with this one, at least in my opinion. But I feel Morbius may cock it all up again a little bit. Overall, I gotta say, I really enjoyed this movie. I like the kind of the unique elements of this plot. I think Tom Holland is fantastic. And I have to say, in the UK cinemas, people don't really clap and cheer like they do in the States, but they did in this one multiple times. So, there you go. I don't know if that was just because we're kind of copying America with more things, or it was just kind of the crowd were that much kind of into it. So, yeah, I've got to say, this movie, I really enjoyed it. It's certainly one of my favourite superhero movies. I am quite keen to see it again, actually. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.